today's study session. Do we need a roll call, Mr. City Clerk?
We'll take a roll call at the open meeting.
Perfect. Is there an order of which we will take these study sessions?
I think we'll start with the Mills Act update.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. Carlos Flores, Principal Planner, here to discuss the Mills Act with you. So as part of the CRPC work plan, staff prepared an updated Mills Act resolution to remove the limitation on eligible Mills Act applications beginning this year. On October, Council approved removing this limitation, but as part of this, per staff's recommendation, we wanted to take a closer look at our Mills Act manual application to re-examine eligible scopes of work through this. So Mills applications, they complete a 10-year property improvement program. Eligible work currently includes any necessary repair, maintenance, restoration, or rehabilitation of a historic property. Give me a quick second, sorry. Oh, this is a different presentation. No, it's not the one that was as part of the packet now.
I think that may be even different from what we have. Our second
Yeah.
slide says Mills Act background and then Mills Act, how does it work?
There it is. All right. So a little bit, I won't go through every detail on this, but a little bit of background on the Mills Act, right? Passed in 1972. The goal of it and what it provides is authority for local governments to enter contracts with owners of qualified historic properties who actively participate in the restoration and maintenance of their historic properties. The goal and the intent of this is for updates to these properties to meet the U.S. Secretary of Interior historic standards. And in exchange for this, property owners receive property tax relief on their properties. Each local government, they're allowed and they establish their own criteria to determine how many contracts they allow in their jurisdiction. So again, going back, we recently updated to not provide a limitation on the number of Mills Act applications we receive. So how does it work? So Mills Act, one of the biggest differences on how it assesses your property value is properties that enter a Mills Act contract, their property is assessed using an income approach to value versus a market approach to value. So what this means is for owner-occupied properties, the income is determined based on comparable rents for similar properties in their area, or if they actually produce income on their property. The income amounts based on actual rent received and typical rent. So when their property is assessed, again, they're not using a market value like most properties are. They use this income value. Here's an example and kind of going to get into the weeds in terms of what this means in actual dollar sign. For this is just an example. So say a home is assessed at about $500,000. You're paying about $5,000 in taxes, so 1%. For example, let's say you charge out this property over a 12-month period, $48,000, removing insurance, repairs, and utilities on that. Your net income on this property is $43,000. So how do they calculate what the value would be? So they base this off what's called a capitalization rate. And there's different components included in there. And for these properties, that includes a historic property risk component. So at about 13.55%, the new valuation on this property would be $317,344. And so you can see in the table here, this sample here, they would get an annual tax reduction of $1,826. So that would be the benefit that a property would receive on an annual basis from their property taxes. So as part of this Mills Act application, one of the biggest components that we require in an application is the 10-year work plan. So this 10-year work plan is in the application where applicants let us know, this is the work I'm proposing to do over the 10 years, and they provide us an estimate of what that work will include. The intent, again, is to preserve the life of the historic features of the property. So as we vet this through, as someone applies for the landmark designation on their property, they're supposed to identify within there what makes this property truly historic. What are some of the components on that property or district or whatever it may be on what makes it historic? And through this, this 10-year plan, they are showing us or intended to show us how they are preserving the historic nature of that property. They, through this, are also the intent also for them to correct any critical systems or structural deficiencies, making sure that the building is not going to collapse. They reverse any inappropriate alterations. So a lot of times you'll see on historic properties, dates from the 1930s and through different ownerships, they made additions to the property, whether legally or illegally. And so it's kind of reversing those inappropriate alterations to that property to make it through its original intent and truly historical nature. All of this work must meet the Secretary of the Interior's standards for rehabilitation, and that's mentioned often and throughout because regardless of anything the city's intending to do, our intent always been and always is to base it off that. There's already standards in place. We're just trying to make it clearer. At the same time, there's no current requirement that we have that the cost of the rehab or restoration equals the amount of tax savings. So for example, in the example of the property saving $1,826, there's no current requirement that a property would have to do work the equivalent of this amount to their property. So contract compliance, so what is city staff, how do they make sure that properties are complying with this? So there's a self-reporting method from owners as well as a city staff inspection. So once every 5 years, city staff, they are required to conduct an inspection on the properties. And at the same time, every year on an annual basis, property owners that enter in these Mills Act applications are asked to submit copies of invoices and receipts on their work, list any additional work completed on the property, provide us an updated rehabilitation plan. As you are probably aware, 10-year improvement plan, things can change over that time. And so really what this is meant to do is provide a status update to make sure that they are complying with their 10-year plan or to give us a status update on any changes. Owners are also able at this time to let us know, to inform us if they want to withdraw from the plan. That is also an option to them. Eligible work currently includes any necessary repair, maintenance, restoration, or rehabilitation of historic property. That is essentially the extent of the guidance within the manuals of what is eligible for this 10-year improvement plan. So really what we're trying to do today with updating the manual is providing more clarity on that. It becomes a difficult time for applicants, for city staff, for council members, for whoever it may be, to really parse through and understand what's included in that. It's a very brief description to understand what's necessary to maintain or restore or rehab a historic property. In the past, Mills Act contracts approved plans have included new appliances, drapes and curtains, and HOA fees. And we bring those up as examples of things that, were they truly meeting the Secretary of Interior standards, or were they truly meeting the intent of this? And so through an update, we think it could provide more guidance to not have things like that be in these Mills Act contracts. Additionally, city staff talked to the Riverside County appraiser to try to get a better idea in terms of valuations, specifically for interior items such as drapes and appliances. And in talking to them, the valuation really is only impacted in the interior for things like this if it's a more of a construction level project. If it's items that can be easily replaced, they agreed and concurred. It really wouldn't be something that would change their valuation in a significant way. So why are we bringing all this and what's the point of all that background? We're seeking council's input to update Appendix A of the guidelines to have clear eligible improvements in the work plan. Now, the idea here isn't to, provide this update and to retroactively look at every Mills Act contract and, revise all of them. Necessarily, the intent isn't even to be stricter per se, but it's more to provide clarity, more to make sure we're meeting all the rules and requirements outlined by the state for the Mills Act, and really to provide a lot more clarity, again, for applicants and city staff to make these Mills Act contract applications and process smoother and, more objective in design. We took the updated guidelines to our CRPC, and they recommended approval back in January. They asked for one revision, which has been incorporated. We updated this Appendix A, which categorizes improvements as either contributing to structural integrity, architectural historical integrity, or identifying it as ineligible. So as you'll see on the next slide, kind of what that means. In March, during the CRPC meeting, we did get comment from a property owner and Mills contract owner that in their opinion, they thought that none of these changes should occur, with the primary focus on interior improvements where they believed that all interior improvements should be eligible in these Mills Act contracts. So here's what the update actually looks like and is proposed to be included in the updated manual. So it breaks it down again by section. So we have interior work, roofing work, windows, architectural elements, mechanical and electrical, and broken down line item by line item to identify whether or not that work is eligible and for what reason it's eligible to be in this Mills Act contract. Any item that's either not listed here or is unclear, if they're trying some work that's not listed here, there is still a discretion that would be built into the manual to allow the director and council and CRPC to review their request and see whether or not we believe it is eligible. We try to capture a lot of different things that someone would do to upgrade their home or to maintain its identity. The second part of the consideration today is going back to whether the cost of the rehab restoration and maintenance improvements proposed as part of a 10-year plan should at a minimum equal the amount of annual tax savings for all new 10-year contracts and renewals of 10-year contracts. So if over 10 years you're identifying, we're saying that you're going to have $10,000 worth of savings, that at a minimum, the work you're doing to your house should be at a minimum that $10,000 that you're putting back into your property. The next step, so based off the input we received today, staff will prepare an item for council on April 25th to bring back the updated manual for the Mills Act. That concludes my presentation.
Are there any questions or comments?
I should probably know this, I suppose, because I heard so much about it the other day, but is the spirit of the Mills Act as it was adopted by the state, was the goal to say that your tax savings are to be equal to or less than the amount of restoration and maintenance on your historical property?
I don't know if that's explicitly said in the original enacting of it. To be honest with you, to be clear with you, back in the 70s, if that was explicitly said, right? More so than here's an incentive on property tax relief, and in turn you are to do work on it. Yeah, but I don't know if it was explicitly said in that original approval.
Thank you for that. And I want to live in a house that The repairs, insurance, and utilities cost $5,000 a year.
I have
On, okay,
just on that last point of should we try to verify that the tax savings are actually expended on qualifying expenses? A favorite expression of the city manager comes to mind, which is the juice worth the squeeze? I frankly had no idea how much work this process is for staff. And I'm overwhelmed. You have my empathy because you're planners, you're not auditors. So and it's an onerous process for the residents who participate also inherently because it's detailed. So the goal of greater clarity, greater predictability sounds great, but I can't imagine imposing on both the residents and the staff the added task of trying to audit expenditures versus savings. The general incentive toward qualifying expenditures should be sufficient. I do have a couple questions. How many Mills Act properties do we have?
A lot.
I don't know. I don't have the number off the top of my head because we did just the recent 7. Yeah, sorry, I don't have the number off the top of my head. That because part of it also, right, these are 10-year contracts. And so there's someone I have to check to see if they're still, the contracts are still alive, so to speak. But yeah, I don't have that.
Are we talking 100, more than 100?
No, but-
Higher.
well,
I see.
the difficulty
I
is
see
in
some
the,
hand signs in the back of the room from someone that works closely that I think it may be above 40 is I think what I saw.
yeah, probably
44.
44. So I've heard you say that the goal is not retroactive application of any new standards. I've heard some consternation from people who've put a whole lot of effort into 10-year plans. Is it possible to assure them in the course of this press toward clarity that their 10-year plans are still good?
correct. Those contracts are signed, sealed, and recorded, right? Any Mills Act contract that was already agreed upon, we're not in the act or intent to try to go back and break those apart and, parse through them for that. It's essentially moving forward, but potentially on the renewals of those, right? As we look at new 10-year plans, working with the applicants to make sure if this is approved, that it's eligible with that. But we would not go back and retroactively break up any Mills Act contracts for this.
Right. If the number is 40 or so, my reaction is it would be a very healthy part of this process to give formal notice to all those 40 people of what's proposed. Because I'm hearing a lot of fear, a lot of confusion. And if it's 40 people and our goal is clarity, talking to them before we do something instead of trying to clean up communications after we do something makes a whole lot of sense to me. So I don't know if April 25th is the right date. The other reason I would commend formally communicating with those folk is that if the goal is clarity, they can tell us what their questions are. They can tell us what confuses them in the new proposed standards, and we'll have the opportunity to make responsive improvements. I've got a list of maybe 10 questions about the particulars of these, why some things are in and why some things are out. I'm not going to do that now. But if I have 10 and I don't have a Mills Act contract, chances are that people who do will have similar questions. So that's my feedback.
Okay, so just, commenting on, staff wants our recommendation, but I know we're still kind of in the talking phase. I agree with staff's recommendation, but I have a question though, if we are actually looking at like the hypothetical example of the Mills Act, where you would calculate the tax reduction, like under capitalization rate, interest component at 4.25%, is that based on what a standard mortgage rate interest would be? I'm on the slide, Mills
Yeah,
Act.
I'm pulling it up.
Oh, okay. So interest component at 4.25%, the amortization component at 4.3%, is that based on the average mortgage rate, or where you?
That's based off the county data. We got that from the county.
Correct. So just a little clarification that the interest component rate is, I think, usually set by the State Board of Equalization, specific for Mills Act contracts. The risk component is through the county assessment office, as well as both the amortization component. I believe they look at that 10-year plan, the improvements, and then come up with that percentage as a basis for that. And then the same for the property tax component, obviously. 1% for single.
Right. Yes, I think it's adding an undue burden to staff to try to have to do that component. So.
Good question.
Having sat in the meeting, I think the staff would agree with you. And I probably should have began with this because I do sit on, I'm the liaison in that meeting, and it is highly emotionally charged, these issues. And the goal here is simply this: take the subjectivity out of it so that it's not always a debate at the counter. And so they went round and round and then round again, trying to get to a place where they felt they had removed the subjectivity, and that a few of these things have been changed following the meeting. So these are the recommendations of the committee that what is it, the cultural, I get confused
Cultural
with it.
Resources Preservation Committee.
So these are the recommendations coming from that committee, and they did take an awful lot of time on them. So I do want to say, yes, we want to make it as easy on the staff and on those who are applying for Mills Act property and exception. And our goal is to get rid of the subjectivity, so we're not having to go back and forth about all this. So what we have here is what the committee has put forward, and how we go forward from then, that's up to the council to recommend, I suppose.
My question is in regards to some of the improvements, the including, or like you said, previously approved were the HOA fees. I don't see if those are addressed or removed.
They are, so under
perfect.
general maintenance, correct. So
And one that I think should be an exception for safety measures where it says ineligible is the installation of smoke or CO2 alarms. I think that technology may not have been available at the time, but certainly as a matter of safety, I think we should allow smoke and CO2 alarms. Isn't that a current state regulation?
it is, yeah, it's more about eligibility of putting that for the Mills Act, but we can definitely change that.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between maintaining something that was in place versus something that we required for the preservation of life. Additionally, one last, go ahead. Okay, I commend staff for all of this and our current liaison for all of the work that it got here. Previously, it was very emotional, I think is a very light word of putting it. And there would be some applications that were very minimal, some that were very extensive. And I think that's what started the process of how do we begin? What does the standard application look like? So congratulations to each of you that have been pushing this along the way to get something that makes it easier to understand, easier to follow through, and a lot, as mentioned, it has to be objective and keeping it fair. The discussions that went to, was this the right kind of plant? Is this the right color of door? They were getting into the minutia that prevented the work that was being done in the committee. So thanks to those of you that were there for part of it. But I do believe that it should be non-negotiable to have CO2 and smoke detectors. Evan, did you
Yeah,
have something?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Everyone needs CO2. Everyone is mandated by our state to have the smoke and CO2. I don't see why that would be then specific to the Mills Act. Everyone is. So why would they get a credit for it when everyone doesn't? I don't think that that should be under the Mills Act. I do think they should, of course, go by the state regulation and have those, but I don't think it applies in the Mills Act.
I disagree that it doesn't matter whether it's part of the Mills Act or not. I think that needs to be the state saying it has to be there versus someone looking at this chart that says this is ineligible, for them to think that this document means that they don't have to see it as a consideration. I think that needs to be allowed as something that allows them and doesn't give any potential misinterpretation, that just reinforces either that or just remove the item altogether. Evan?
Daisy, thank you, Carlos, for the report. So what we're looking at is the updated Appendix A, is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
What did the original look like? Or in what way is this different?
The original one provided simple definitions on different scopes of work. It really just provided it provided a glossary, sorry. It's more of a glossary of different building construction. Here's this, but it didn't provide any clarity on what is or isn't eligible or what the work should include. So it's more of a glossary of definitions, kind of.
So breaking down into those three categories, each of the items, breaking it down into structural integrity, architectural.
That's our
Yeah.
new proposal,
Got
right?
it.
Yeah, it didn't do any of that before.
Perfect. That's terrific. Thank you. And secondly, following up on Councilmember Kelly's point about the onerous nature of imposing all this, if I remember, we went from allowing 7 approved properties per year, and now we're basically unlimited.
Correct. There's no limitation on it, and that was the other reason why bringing this forward, right? Is if we're going to have more than 7 applications, we need to make that process a lot smoother and more streamlined for everyone involved.
And we haven't gone to that unlimited number yet. We're still operating under the 7 per year.
2024, this is gonna be the first year that will happen.
Okay.
So the ones coming, any applications received this year, we're not capping it at 7. Whatever we present to council are all the complete applications we received this year.
Okay, so it'd be like a double whammy, allowing more and also putting more scrutiny on each property is what Councilmember Kelly. was
Yeah,
talking about.
and I mean, oh, well, correct me if I'm wrong. I think the the onerous part of it is more about when we enter into an agreement, the annual inspection and reporting coming from the owners and city staff on them. That's the part, you know, where as part of the consideration in terms of the work matching up with the taxes, where we would have to make sure that all of that aligns with each other. In terms of the update to eligibility for these applications, it's not necessarily, I repeat this again, just because to remove perception on it. It's not necessarily us saying we're going to be stricter on it or have tighter restrictions. It's more about clarity to making sure that this really meets the Secretary of the Interior's standards as well as our standards on it.
Perfect. All right, thank you.
On average, how much would, and of course, every single one is different based on each applicant and what they present. Is there any given time where you could say one application comes in and this is how long it takes for us to even get through the checklist of their materials? Because I know that when there were 7, it kind of limited and who you would take. And then we said there will be no limit. But how much of this then becomes part of your workload? Is this diverted to someone that's essentially going to be doing this full time? Or where's I mean, I'm worried about the amount of work on staff that's already going on with the unlimited number.
Well, to be honest, if this does get approved with this level of Appendix A, it'll make that process significantly smoother and easier. Whereas before, as staff is reviewing the applications, it's doing a completeness check and then it's really reviewing all parts of the work plan. And again, that back and forth with the applicants, as you can imagine, having to review the state requirements, reviewing the original designation. There's a lot of moving parts and a lot of discussion to get to a point to tell an applicant, yes, this is eligible, or no, I don't believe this is eligible. This will be much more streamlined, not just and make it easier for new staff members as they come into this process, say, review it against this checklist. And then you identify any areas that are inconsistent. That process is much quicker than going through an entirely subjective thing.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
And now that we have opened up or taken off the limit of 7 per year, is there any idea how much interest there is? Like, in other words, can we anticipate having 100 applications next year? Or, I mean, have you got a feel for it yet?
I haven't got a feel for it yet, but no, I haven't got a feel for it yet. I know last year we had about, close to a dozen interested, but no, I don't have a feel for it yet. If it's 100, we will let you know.
Do you foresee that, for example, in one community where they're going to say, well, this was allowed back then and you allowed this within my HOA per se, what are the differences of what you allowed them, things that were permitted before? Again, just in terms of anticipating kind of community questions that I'm sure you'll get.
In planning, we deal with that a lot in a lot of different avenues, not just this. So I anticipate that happening. And we're tasked with communicating to these applicants in terms of what was in the past and what is now and the reasons for it. But yeah, I mean, I do anticipate that, I feel confident we can navigate that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Anything else? Well, thank you so much. I know that this has been a labor of love and migraines to get to this level, and I commend you. I commend you and the entire team. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Mr. City Manager.
Yeah, I'd like to turn it over to Richard to take us through the dining deck program updates.
It is. Good afternoon, Mayor Council. For the record, Richard Canoni, Director of Development Services. The item for discussion this afternoon is related to our outdoor dining deck program. Just a quick recap, if you recall, back in November of should be 2023. I apologize. Council took action on updated design guidelines for the dining decks, as well as extended the temporary program to June 30 of 2026, and then provided direction to staff to research an annual fee based upon the square footage and return at a future meeting. And so we started doing that research and really based our presumption on two major sort of factors. One, in that this was originally created right as part of an emergency order through COVID. That order has since been lifted, but there's this desire to continue. And again, looking sort of at this level of fairness where some businesses are able to take advantage of this, where others are not, depending on those criteria that were established in those guidelines. And so just a quick overview. We have 8 total TUPs for dining decks within the right-of-way, 7 within El Paseo and 1 within the Highway 111 frontage road. As you see, they range in square feet pretty drastically from 254 all the way up to close to 900 square feet in size. And so a couple things really to focus on primarily with respect to those 7 that are within El Paseo. The current TUPs expire June 30th of this year. So as was approved on the 16th of November, a new TUP application would be required, and those new guidelines would need to be adhered to. We did do some assessments already of the all 8 of those dining decks. While they're not dramatically out of sync with those guidelines, there are a number of them that almost all of them would have to have some level of improvement to meet the new guidelines. One of the other sort of competing factors with this program is the fact the El Paseo paving project is starting late June, early July. That will require all of these dining decks to be removed from within the El Paseo right-of-way. And then what we were looking at doing starting next week is really preparing a letter based upon some of the feedback we get today.
Can I trouble you for just a second as you go back and forth? We lose the sound, and I want to be sure that people listening can capture all of that because I know this is one that we'll be getting a lot of questions on. Thank you.
We'll be preparing a notice, working with Eric's office, making sure that his folks or his team, along with our planning group and our code compliance officers, will hand deliver these letters, so they're not just getting a letter from code in the mail, but also scheduling a separate meeting for those business owners that have those TUPs to specifically answer any questions they may have, as well as letting them know of the deficiencies and what would need to be updated should they seek to want to apply for a new TUP. And then in addition to that, there is the monthly El Paseo Merchants Association meeting, which is also next week, that staff attends and would be available to answer any questions. And so what we really looked at in coming up with the methodology for this, what we'll call this exclusive use fee, is we're working again with Eric's office in using CoStar to examine both the what they have as an asking rate, square footage rent per year, as well as the average market rate. And so for the purposes of this exercise, we really focused on the average market rate. And the reason we looked at really El Paseo, San Pablo, and the 111 frontage roads, based upon the criteria within those guidelines, that's essentially where these dining decks currently are or could be located. And so what we did then was just to give an idea of what those costs would equate to. We came up with sort of 3 different scenarios, obviously based upon the existing square footage. One would be that the first column is that annual fee based upon that market rate. The second is the blended rate that we used for those 3 areas at $28.31 a square foot over the year. And then we also looked at as an option, again, we just looked at using a 50% reduction based upon sort of our seasonal peak time. Again, we could have used 75, 80. We thought for the purposes of at least the discussion, looking at what that 50% reduction would be on that square footage basis. And I won't go through every single one of those, but it gives you an idea of the changes. Again, as I indicated, there were a big range in square foot of the existing square footage of the existing dining decks. As we did some of the research, we looked at two cities really kind of stuck out in particular, where the city of San Diego and city of Santa Monica both did something very similar, where they had the program, they wanted to continue it, but then charged on a square foot basis for their right of way. Santa Monica based theirs on, depending where the location where you were and those rates, whether it's Third Street Promenade down to Ocean, they all had various different rates corresponding with those areas. San Diego did a little bit differently. They went from anywhere from $40 a foot to 30 to 20. They looked at it depending on the neighborhood. And so, and there was this factor of a pedestrian activity. So obviously, if the closer you are to downtown, the higher the rents would be, which kind of makes sense. But if you were in some of the neighborhoods, they were a little bit lower. Interesting exercise on the side. Our square footage, our prices were not that far off of where some of those other areas, which were pretty interesting, at least for me. But one other thing that they did was there were some limits to the maximum size of those. Some did on because they were taking up parking spaces. So typically there's a 8 feet by 22 is sort of the standard parallel parking space. And so some allowed up to a max of 2, some of 3. It really varied. Others limited it to the frontage of the business. Some also allowed it to encroach into it with permission of that neighboring business into half of their frontage. Just another quick update, because we do have, I think, at least 2 dining decks that are on private property within their private parking lots. Those would not be covered under this item. There's already a code section that addresses this, and they're required to go through the conditional use permit process. And we currently have 1 application that's under review now, going through that route. And so really for consideration, we had 2 recommendations. One, the first obviously being the exclusive use license fee, that we adopt a fee effective July 1, that fee be based on that blended rate of $28.31 a square foot over the year. And then the second recommendation would be to limit the size of those dining decks to the frontage of that business, but allow them to encroach into a neighboring business on one side up to half of their space with the approval of that owner. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
Okay, thanks, Richard. Why does staff recommend the blended market rate versus just the market rate?
Because it varied, we wanted to at least provide some level of relief, and thought that the blended rate would kind of made sense to us.
Well, I don't know. I would disagree. I mean, I'm uncomfortable giving away a taxpayer property or taxpayer resource and subsidizing something like this. This to me doesn't seem to warrant subsidy. So that's just my 2 cents. I had some strong feelings. This is just comments now, but I had some strong feelings about the dining decks. I thought they were a temporary measure during COVID, and they were kind of an eyesore now that we're back to normal. However, after talking to a few business owners, restaurateurs, residents who have an interest in El Paseo, it does bring a level of vibrancy and activity to El Paseo that I don't think we have otherwise. I think you've addressed this. This is good. We were facing 2 issues. We were giving away taxpayer space or public space for free. So we've addressed that, or we are planning to address that with this potential fee. And then there's the appearance issue, in my opinion. And I'm just wondering what we see now, what is currently out there on the street now, conforms to the standards moving forward that we adopted January 1st. Is that right? So if they do get rebuilt after the repaving project, we can anticipate seeing similar structures same format, paint, color, design standards that we see out there now. Is that correct?
They would be different and I may defer to Eric on this as they brought those guidelines forward.
Yeah, I think the process has been updated a bit to go back to an architectural review committee review. Is that correct, Nick? It sounds correct. And that there are tighter design guidelines associated with those dining decks, but a lot of it really focused on the safety aspect on the ends of those dining decks to make sure they can handle some sort of impact or bump by an automobile. But yes, there's another formalized process now that with enhanced design standards.
So basically we can anticipate them being a little more robust, stout, good looking.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Cheers. There could be, it's very appealing to think about a blended rate. It's simpler to apply. But picking up on Councilmember Truby's comment, it might not be perceived as fair on San Pablo, where the market rate is lower. And to the extent outdoor dining would add to the sense of vibrance on San Pablo, perhaps we don't want to have a structure that creates a disincentive for them to participate. We approved the new standards. They have clarity both about aesthetics and safety that will require new investments from the restaurant. So my initial thought is that the 50% rate for the duration of the initial TUP recognizes that we're asking them to make that investment and assist with transitioning from free to market rate. So I think that would be the business-friendly approach.
Can I ask for clarification on that? So if there's a 2-year TUP issued through 2026, are you arguing that the 50% year one to recognize the initial investments, then going to market rate year 2?
I said the duration of the TUP, which would be 2 years, but obviously when this comes back, we'll have a full discussion. So
Okay, thank you.
we'll figure that out.
Thank you. First, I think I believe I see the dining decks add a whole environment of vibrancy on El Paseo that is important, and what it's done on San Pablo, and of course on the one on the frontage road, it's added an awful lot. I listening, I hadn't thought about it before, but listening to Councilmember Kelly's talk about the 50% reduction through, and we'll have, I know that discussion at another time, we're going to ask them to pick them all up, store them or dispose of them and come back. So there is good sense in saying, okay, through your TUP or through, considering, are we paving, are we grinding, or are we just slurry coating El Paseo? That's, I guess, a tangent, but nonetheless.
It's a resurface.
So, okay. So is that slurry or we're grinding?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So we're asking them to pick those up, and that's going to be at a significant cost to them. So factoring that in, the 50% makes sense through the TUP, and then looking at whatever comes next. But I know we're not here to make decisions, but it's part of the thought process, I believe. Thank you.
And then
One of the thi-
are we
oh, sorry,
going,
go ahead.
sorry, are we going back to the business owners again to talk to them about the plan?
That was the intent, starting
Mhm.
next week.
Okay.
I've seen it and heard it from both sides. One of the things that has come up is from people, well, we're talking about fairness between El Paseo and 111. Well, there are people across the city that are saying we're only looking at these two specific places. This is where here again, is the city looking at commerce equally, or are we focusing in one region? I continue to think, as Councilmember Truby mentioned, that originally this was supposed to be a short-term solution. This was supposed to be an equitable measure during COVID. And even if we're going to charge them, it will be a portion of it. I understand that we're giving them the opportunity to use city property that they're leasing essentially, but I think we need to look at if this is something we can support moving forward, are we going to come up with similar standards that will be applicable to different parts of the city, not just what we're looking at now? Any other questions, thoughts, comments? While it's time, while we're
Okay,
here.
okay, I will. One thing, I understand Councilmember Kelly's point about helping to subsidize, given the cost of destruction and the reconstruction of these decks, potentially if they decide to move forward with them, these restaurants decide to move forward with them. If you look at the math, though, if they've had them up for the last 3 years, they've already enjoyed, almost 6 figures worth of free rent at the taxpayer expense. So I'd like to consider that as well when considering the rate moving forward, just to give staff some idea of where we are. So thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point to put in there. They have enjoyed some free rent. We don't want to give them squatters' rights is the way I'm looking at it. Is there anything else that we have? Any other presentations?
No, I think we got the direction, or at least this is very helpful to us. I think we can reformulate it. We'll go back to the business owners and let them know that we're looking at a couple different options. I do want to clarify to your one question. One of the things that Richard did was we drew, we've got basic commercial rents for the major arterials. We haven't seen any dining decks proposed for Washington Street, for instance, or something like that, but we can easily put in our policy, and we will bring that back to you, that we'll use those numbers for the average rent spaces. And if you want to discount it, we'll factor that in applicable to the areas that they're in, the streets they're on, because that's the big influencer of these market rates.
Yeah, I think some people think that they're not eligible because that's where the conversation had been. So I
Okay.
appreciate, excuse me, the opportunity to let everyone know this is not only commerce here or dining here, but we want to see how we can apply equity to business owners in different spaces. Granted, depending on the physical ability and space, because we know not every place is a safe determination where it can go. Thank you. That is exactly what I was going to say. It is now 3:53. Our meeting would normally commence at 4 o'clock. Since we've been here for a little bit, I will ask for a 15-minute grace period. Well, let's round it up. No, let's do 15. So we'll see everyone back in 15. Take this as a stretch break, and thank you so much.